The overwhelming and ceaseless atrocities of Israel's government leave most Palestinians with little opportunity to reflect on the moral aspect of our resistance. I'm Ula Al-Asi, and today I'm gonna tell you how can Palestinian resistance be fairly assessed in Palestine Box. The occupation of Palestine is based on a 19th century ideology that denied the very existence of Palestinian people and pursued a colonial agenda asserting divine claims to a land without a people. In response to this, Palestinian resistance adopted the strategy of a protracted people's war to regain recognition as a dispossessed rather than non-existent nation. To this day, Palestinians still have no state or armed forces. Our occupiers subject us to curfews, expulsions, home demolitions, legalized torture, and a highly imaginative assortment of human rights violations. The American media call our search for freedom as terrorism. This has shaped Western public consciousness and resulted in an international bias that tends to describe instances of violence against Palestinian civilians in neutral language, reducing Palestinian losses to mere faceless statistics, while using emotional language and visuals to describe Israeli losses. This distortion of the Palestinian resistance has clouded all the reasonable dialogue. Many of our efforts to defy the arbitrary rules of the occupier are dismissed as terrorism, while we are given the right of self-determination by armed struggle according to the United Nations Charter's Article 51 concerning self-defense. Another factor influencing Palestinian resistance is the gloomy history of peace talks and the lack of international support. Negotiations with Israel have given us nothing but promises of autonomy, while enforcing the will of the powerful and establishing the legalities as the basis for a lasting settlement. The most glaring absence in this peace process was an honest peace broker. The United Nations has been unable to take steps to ensure the implementation of Palestinian rights. The relentless denial of Palestinian rights without an effective verbal or actual international response has left us acutely aware of that self-defense is our only hope. International law grants people fighting an illegal occupation the right to use all necessary means at their disposal to end their occupation, and the occupied are entitled to seek and receive support. Armed resistance was used in the American Revolution, the Afghanistan resistance against Russia, which the US supported, and the French resistance against the Nazis, and even in the Nazi concentration camps, or more famously, in the Warsaw Ghetto. Palestinian resistance arises out of a similarly oppressive situation. The degree of violent response varies from case to case. Indeed, in many instances, resistance is mainly non-violent. Despite all the odds against them, people resiliently continue to live, study, pray, plant crops in occupied lands. In a few cases, they actively resist and resort to violence. As we have seen, both peaceful and violent resistance are met with sanctioned deliberate state violence by the Israeli forces. The death of the American peace activist Rachel Corrie is an evidence enough for that. Where is the Palestinian Gandhi? Some people wonder, our Gandhis are either in prison, in exile, or in graves. Nor do we have a population in the hundreds of millions. We are 3.3 million unarmed defenseless individuals facing 6 million Israelis, virtually all of them are soldiers. This is not industrial colonization. The Israelis are practicing ethnic cleansing to secure the land for Jews alone. It is ironic that few of those who exhort Palestinians to emulate Gandhi question Zionism, the root cause of the Israeli occupation. In 1938, however, Gandhi himself questioned the premise of political Zionism. Gandhi clearly rejected the idea of the Jewish state in the Promised Land by pointing out that the Palestine of the biblical conception is not a geographical tract. Palestinian people have not gone to another people's homeland to kill or dispossess. Our ambition is not to blow ourselves up in order to terrify others. We're asking for what all people rightfully have: a decent life in the land of our bears. What is most troubling about the criticism of our resistance is that it cares a little for our suffering, our disposition, and the violation of our most basic right. When we are murdered, these critics are unmoved. Our peaceful, everyday struggle to live a decent life makes no impression on them. When some of us come to retaliation and revenge, the outrage and condemnation is directed at us. Israeli security is deemed more important than our right to a basic livelihood. Israeli children are seen as more human than ours. Israeli pain more unacceptable than ours. When we label against the inhumane conditions imposed upon us, our critics dismiss us as terrorists, enemies of life and civilization. But it is not to appease our critics that we must revisit our resistance. It is because we care about Palestinian morality and morale. International law and the historical precedent of many nations sanction the right of the people suffering from colonial oppression to take up arms in their freedom struggle. Why should it be different in the Palestinian case? Is it not the point of the international law that it is universal? To live under oppression and submit to injustice is incompatible with psychological health. Resistance is not only a right and a duty, but it is a remedy for the oppressed, even if not as a strategic, pragmatic option. We should resist as an expression of and insistence on our human dignity. Violent resistance must always be in defense and as the last resort. The history of our resistance must be explored and assessed from the perspective of law, morality, experience, and the politics, taking timing and context into account and with due regard for human rights, international law, and widely shared norms of behavior. Because the world has offered not a single remedy for the numerous wounds the Palestinians have suffered. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share the video. See you.